Good morning, and I think thank you for that introduction. I don't know where to go with that. I've really only been, have to admit, I've only been aware of the TED phenomena for about the last year or so. And when the conference organizers first approached me with the idea of participating in this, I didn't really see the connection between what I do as a Yukon government archaeologist and the big, wide, motivational world of TED. And I can't talk nearly as fast as Wade Davis, so I thought, you know, what role can I play in this? But when I was told that the theme of the event was breaking trail, I realized that I probably do have something to contribute here, because for the last number of years I've been involved in a real fundamental trail breaking research initiative here in the Yukon that has involved a great many Yukoners and has really put the Yukon in a position of prominence in the field of archaeology. And I just thought it was important for me to try to get the word out about this, and especially to acknowledge all the people who have participated over the years. Now, it may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, but in terms of archaeology, the Yukon, most archaeologists would consider the Yukon sort of a subarctic backwater of archaeological research. Because populations were always small here, consequently archaeological sites tend to be really small and scattered, and that impression of impoverished archaeological record, it stands in contrast to the rich cultural traditions that we know that Yukon First Nations enjoy. And I'm very pleased to say that over the last decade, there's been a transformation. The Yukon now has a much more prominent role in Canadian archaeology and is actually at the center of a web of international research that's taking place. And it's not just archaeologists, but people from around the world that are becoming now more aware of what's going on in the Yukon. So what I'm going to be talking about here today is the Yukon Ice Patch Project. What I'd like to do is go through a number of the artifacts that have been found. We've got some extraordinary, beautifully preserved, fragile organic artifacts that have been recovered over the last 10 or 15 years. But I don't want to dwell on that. I don't want to overemphasize that, but instead I want to look at how we went from the accidental discovery of a small stick frozen into an immense field of caribou dung to a central position in this new emerging world of glacial archaeology. And I also, again, want to acknowledge all the people who've been involved through the years. Now, just so you don't think I'm overemphasizing the dung portion of this, dung is central to the theme here. We're about 10 kilometers away from that ice patch, and all that black material is dung. So that just gives you an idea of these quantities that we're talking about. Our story starts in 1997 with this fellow, Jerry Cusick, and his wife, Kirsten Benedict, were hunting sheep on the mountains on the west side of Kusawa Lake. They climbed up to the top of the mountain, and as they came up to this ice patch, they recognized that this great thick mantle of what turned out to be ancient caribou dung across the base of this ice. Now, Jerry is a caribou biologist, and two things were significant here. One is he'd never seen this much shit before. And the other is that this was an area where caribou had not been present for at least 70 years. So he knew he had a significant discovery. Now, he returned to Whitehorse and recruited the eminent caribou biologist, Don Russell, who returned to the site with him. When they were there, they found this small stick that still had a bit of sinew and feather attached to it. They thought this might be worth collecting. They brought it into the office. We subsequently radiocarbon dated this at 4,300 years old. And this, at the time, was one of the oldest organic artifacts ever found in Canada. And with this one simple discovery was the beginning of the Yukon Ice Patch and many of the things that spun off as the result of that. Now, as we discovered, For many thousands of years, caribou in southern Yukon have migrated up into the alpine areas in summer months to escape the harassing insects and to help keep their temperatures cool. Now, this would have been a very lucrative arrangement for First Nation hunters, but as it turns out, it was also a very lucrative arrangement for archaeologists, for First Nation researchers, for biologists, because if you shot your arrow or your dart or your spear and missed the prey, it's possible that became buried in the snow, incorporated into the ice, and now thousands of years later, the ice is melting, the accumulated dung is melting out, and these extremely extraordinary artifacts, remarkable artifacts, are being revealed here. Now, over the last 15 years, we've recovered more than 220 artifacts from the ice fields. We've found more than 1,700 faunal remains, animal bones from the ice patches, and many of them are very, very well preserved. The oldest of these is more than 9,000 years old, which takes us almost back to the end of the Ice Age here in southern Yukon. The president of the Canadian Archaeology Association last year, in giving us an award for a publication that we put out, said that the ice patch archaeology story is one of the biggest stories in Canadian archaeology in the last 20 years. Now, these finds are remarkable on a number of counts. That one, I've talked about the preservation, but what's really important about these artifacts is that they are organic. They are not stone. The archaeological record across Canada is dominated by stone because in the acidic soils of the subarctic, only stone is really preserved after a couple of hundred years. So we know that 95% of First Nation material culture was organic, but it's very seldom preserved in the archaeological record. So some of these finds are almost unique to the Yukon. Across North America, we have some of the finest collections of these artifacts that you're going to find anywhere in North America. The other thing that's really important about these is that because they're organic, unlike stone tools, they can be directly radiocarbon dated. So we can look back not only at changes in technology through time, we can actually date when changes have occurred. And that's allowed us to really make leaps forward in our understanding of the archaeological history of the Yukon, and to sweep aside some assumptions, long-held assumptions that we've had here. And you can see this is a 1,400-year-old moccasin that is just a remarkable. This is the oldest moccasin ever found in Canada. But I think really it's at the community level that these exquisitely preserved organic objects have had the greatest impact. They ignite the imagination not only of people looking at them, and the people who study them, but especially for the people who are looking for them. And I can tell you from personal experience that when you have a field assistant who's walking around in the mountains and finds a long wooden throwing dart or an arrow or a moccasin like this, they get far more satisfaction and cultural awareness from this kind of discovery than they ever do sitting in a 1 by 1 meter pit on their knees with a trowel excavating flakes of stone. And through the years we've had the opportunity to involve a great many people in this project. Now, the project actually has evolved as a series of partnerships, mainly through the Yukon government and the 6 First Nations within whose traditional territories the ice patches fall. This is our study area. I don't know if this has got a laser pointer on it or not. I don't want to press anything to mess anything up. But this is between Whitehorse and Haines Junction, north and south of the Alaska Highway. All the red names are the ice patches that we regularly visit, and it's within the traditional territories of Champagne-Aziac, Carcross-Tagish, Kwantlen-Dun, Teslin-Tlingit, Ta'an-Quachin, and Kluane First Nation. Now, I'm an archaeologist, so I'm going to emphasize the archaeology, but this has really been a multidisciplinary project. I talked about 1,700 faunal elements that have been recovered. This has really stimulated a lot of other kinds of research. Ancient caribou genetics, caribou diet and habitat. There's even been studies on we have an unbelievable collection of mummified small mammals and birds that are some of the oldest preserved tissues of their kind in the world. So there's been all kinds of other research initiatives, and through this we've developed partnerships with the University of Alaska, University of Alberta, Oxford University in England, the Smithsonian Institution, Canadian Wildlife Service, just to name some of them. But really, from the Yukon point of view, the project has touched a great many people here in the Yukon and has become one of the marquee archaeology projects in Canada. Over the past decade, Rick Farnell, this is Rick Farnell here on your left-hand side. Sheila Greer and I have, between the three of us, we've given dozens of talks across North America, even in Europe, on this project. And it's been a great opportunity to showcase the Yukon. The artifacts, the scenery, the culture of the Yukon are so compelling that these presentations almost give themselves. And it's been a really great opportunity to spread the word about what's going on here in the Yukon. These are just some images of, I can't name everybody who's participated, but I'll flash through some images through the years of people who've been involved. We have had more than 60 different field assistants through the years, most of them from the 6 First Nations partners. We've worked with more than 20 different elders and probably had 24 institutional or academic affiliations, or work with 24 different institutions. Rick Farnell again, Tagish Johnson, Art Johns, Sheila Greer have been some of the most prominent influences at the local level. Some of the images of various ice patches and people who've been at them. Now, I mentioned that at the beginning that this is an international scope project, and it's part of a global phenomenon. Since our work in the late 1990s, research initiatives sprang up in Alaska, the Northwest Territories, Wyoming, and Colorado. People went up into alpine areas that they hadn't looked before and began finding similar kinds of things. In 2008, a small group of researchers in Switzerland wanted to make people aware of things they'd been finding in the Swiss Alps, so they organized a small symposium, and 2 people from North America, myself and a colleague from New Mexico, went to this, as well as some Norwegians, and everybody came together and sort of shared what they were finding, and it was really quite stimulating to see what was going on in these other places in the world. We came to realize that in the face of global warming, alpine areas around the world were revealing extraordinary and unprecedented objects that had been frozen in ice for thousands of years. And that these areas that had previously been considered marginal or archaeologically impoverished, perhaps like the Yukon, were producing some of the most stunning examples of this kind of technology, or these artifacts. And coming out of that, obviously one of the first discoveries of this nature was the frozen body of the Tyrolean Iceman in the Alps. But in the late 1990s, we had, with warm temperatures in the 90s, we had the discovery of Quedadan Sinchi in northern British Columbia. We had hundreds of Viking Age artifacts melting out of the ice in Norway. We have frozen mummified material in Andes in South America, as well as the hunting artifacts that we've seen here in Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. So following that first meeting in Bern, Switzerland, the next meeting of the glacial archaeologists was held in Trondheim, Norway in 2010. We had 30 participants at that, and I don't know if people are aware or not, but it was mentioned earlier that earlier this year, 2012, the Whitehorse hosted the 3rd International Glacial Archaeology Symposium. We had 36 presentations from 13 countries around the world. And it was just a remarkable growth that has occurred within this new discipline. Following that, and at the same time, simultaneously, the journal Arctic came out with a dedicated supplementary volume in June that is entirely dedicated to alpine and ice patch archaeology. And we were approached by a major academic publisher in Great Britain to develop a new journal for the discipline, and I'm pleased to say that that's going to be coming out shortly in the next couple of months, and that will be the new journal for this discipline. So, in closing, I'd like to say that I'd point out that archaeology is not a discipline that frequently experiences new areas of investigation. In order to do that, somebody has to break trail. And in this case, people broke trail, even if it meant walking through long piles of caribou dung. And I'm very proud to say that the Yukon has been a real trailbreaker in this emerging new area of glacial archaeology. And that is, let me just say here we go. And the research partners who've been involved through all these years. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.